Bella Swan had never been special. She didn't stand out in school. She didn't have a large group of friends. She wasn't particularly beautiful or talented. She had always been the quiet girl who went unnoticed, the one who watched from a distance and convinced herself that it was better that way. When she arrived in Forks, she thought everything would stay the same. But then Edward Cullen looked at her for the first time, and the feeling of being invisible disappeared. At first, she noticed it subtly. A few fleeting glances in the hallways, a shift in the air when he was near. There was something strange about the way Edward watched her, as if he were trying to understand her, as if there was something about her that unsettled him. Bella interpreted it as fascination, as an attraction he was trying to hide. It never occurred to her that what Edward felt had nothing to do with love. The reality was much darker. From the moment he saw her, Edward knew she was different. Not just because of her blood, though that was part of it. Not just because he couldn't read her mind, though that intrigued him. There was something deeper, something primal, something territorial. Bella Swan was prey, and he couldn't let her go. The first time he snuck into her room, it wasn't because he wanted to protect her. It wasn't because he cared about her safety. It was because he needed to see her sleeping, still, unconscious, defenseless. The moonlight streamed through the window, illuminating her face. She slept on her side, her lips slightly parted, her hair spilling messily over the pillow. Her breathing was slow, rhythmic. Edward tilted his head, analyzing every detail. He didn't move all night. He didn't need to. Just being there, without her knowing, was enough. But then, Bella murmured something. He couldn't help but move closer, and the moment he heard his name escape from her sleeping lips, he smiled. She was his. From that night on, his plan began. Edward understood the game of manipulation better than anyone. He had spent over a century perfecting his ability to read humans, to predict their reactions, to influence their emotions without them realizing it. With Bella, he couldn't read her mind, but that only made him more cautious, more meticulous. The first step was isolation. At first, he did it subtly. He didn't directly ask her to stop talking to her friends, but he made her feel like no one understood her the way he did. "You don't realize it, but they don't really know you," he whispered one day, his gaze full of understanding. "They see you as someone who doesn't belong." Bella started to pull away from them without him having to ask. The second step was dependence. Some nights, he disappeared without warning. He ignored her during the day, barely speaking to her in class. Then, when he noticed Bella was on the verge of breaking, he came back with more intensity than before. "Forgive me," he would say, touching her face gently. "You don't know how hard this is for me." Bella never asked why. She just accepted it, and over time, she needed him. Every time Edward pulled away, she felt an unbearable emptiness, and that was exactly what he wanted. Every night as Bella slept, Edward perfected his experiment. He whispered barely audible things, testing how much he could influence her subconscious. "You can't live without me. Nobody understands you like I do. Only I truly love you." At first, Bella didn't notice, but her behavior began to change. She stopped talking to her friends as much. She stopped having her own thoughts when he was near. She stopped thinking about what she wanted because she only wanted what Edward wanted. And then Jacob Black arrived. Jacob was a problem. Jacob was a real threat, not because he could hurt her, but because he could offer her an alternative. A path where Bella was free. Edward couldn't allow that. He knew how to handle the situation. He knew how to shape her thoughts until Bella herself believed Jacob was dangerous. "He's unstable. He's unpredictable. I don't want to forbid you, but be careful." He said it in just the right tone, with just the right look. Bella didn't question it, because Edward had trained her to trust only him. But it wasn't enough. Jacob was still there, and Bella was still smiling with him. Edward felt something strange, something he hadn't felt in over a century. Jealousy, not of Jacob, but of Bella's freedom when he wasn't around. So he did the only thing he could. He left. Edward thought his absence would destroy her, and for a while it did. Bella fell apart. Her sadness was absolute. But then something unexpected happened. Bella moved on. It wasn't immediate, it wasn't easy, but Jacob helped her, and Edward felt his control slipping away. When he returned, he expected to find her devastated, but Bella didn't run into his arms. She didn't cry with happiness. She didn't collapse. She looked at him calmly, with a coldness he had never seen in her eyes. It was as if, in his absence, Bella had woken up. For the first time in his existence, Edward felt fear. Not because she could hurt him, not because Bella was a threat, but because he realized he had lost control. And if he couldn't control Bella, what was he?